Happy New Year, if you can take it, and a few warnings. Hello, this is David McMillan here, former smuggler, retired by the forces of fact. Yes, the Berlin Wall came down and now I have to stay at home. But I don't really, I get about. In fact, I've been preparing a video on changing identities, but before that, I'll just say, whatever happened to 2019? Probably about the time you're watching this, 2019 is slipping through your hands, just as that glass of red wine is slipping through your fingers to the white carpet of what will soon be your former best friend. But let's see where we can go with 2019. What did the year amount to? Well, in your personal life, probably, well, not that much. But publicly, and that's how we get through the day, by seeing what's going around about town, but mostly about the world by tuning into our news. And there would have been, of course, another story about Epstein. Really, though, we're poking our fingers through the remains of the dead. It's a great convenience that he's dead, and some people think he's not, but he probably is. He just looked too damn crestfallen when I saw him. But the stories will keep popping up, and the reason is his little black book was full of famous names, and you can name check. In fact, here in England, you can do more than name check. The annual honours list, that's the list of people who get knighthoods and various other noble titles from the Queen, their addresses were published. So they're all lost out of letter writing, will probably kick back into gear. In the UK, we had an election which was brought about because of Brexit, leaving the European Union. And I've always said that it will never really happen. But in law, it looks like it's going to happen. But what will that mean? Any great change? No, not a lot. The great change will be in the changing of names. Everything will be called something else. So in a year or two's time, all the agreements we had under the European Union will be given new life with a new identity. And of course, that theme's on my mind at the moment. But we'll cut through that, because that's rather dull. Where can we go? Oh yes, we've got, in the US, we have Donald Trump and the new Idiocracy. I mentioned Idiocracy because it was a great film from a few years ago where I think a soldier is he a soldier? I think so. He's being experimented with. Anyway, he wakes up in a couple of 100 years' time, and the world's a real mess, run by idiots. And in that world, the president is a former television wrestler. And of course, at the time, that seemed the wildest possibility they could come up with. But it doesn't seem so wild anymore. One thing you will notice is that all the television programs that kind of followed on from The West Wing and those novels by Tom Clancy that had either a corrupt president, or some of the other ones that had a former Marine as a president, that's pretty laughable. But still, I really can't dismiss anything. There have been ex-soldiers who've become presidents, like Eisenhower. But my point is this. Trump is entertaining, and that's what we want. We've got nothing better to do. So, we're stuck with it. Before moving on, I'll just go through a very quick list of the top stories that you seem to take an interest in. Perhaps not you personally, but most people. And they included the story of Shamima Begum. Now that was the girl who ran off to Syria and married an IS fighter, had some children, and, well, ended up being stuck there in a refugee camp. People want to take away her British citizenship, even though she was born here. It seems a pointless and probably doubtfully legal gesture. But then again, the lost people is quite a theme. The viewers were not really interested in the lost people unless they did something spectacular, like go down in a big boatload somewhere in the Mediterranean as they clambered towards the shores of freedom. But I guess Germany took so many of the refugees, I think our conscience, our collective conscience, is absolved of having to worry about any more. But it does remind me of the Syrian war, more or less, in fact, does keep going on. Why should we really care? Just to remind you of something that might be worth thinking about when we look at troubles around the world. Sure, all the images are pretty horrible, and children being hurt, hospitals being bombed, that kind of thing. It all started out with a grave mistake of the president trying to imitate the responses of his dad, which back in the 60s and 70s was to crush everybody. But that was before the internet age. So there were plenty of replacement rebels because they saw everything. But here's the point. We don't really care terribly much about all of that because it's not us. I was thinking that many years ago when I was watching some horrifying footage of the Warsaw Ghetto with shriveled up children dying in the streets, starving to death. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to back then because we all went to war anyway, but not for those particular reasons about those who were suffering there. In a sense, we didn't know about it at the time. But here's the thing, we know about everything now. And our responses are directly related, kind of the way that insects do. If it's one of your kind, you have one response. If it's not your kind, you have another. Imagine this. Think that we switched on our televisions and saw, yes, the streets of Stockholm in Sweden, where there were children clearly starving to death. There were idiots running around with guns. There were blockades. There were supply shortages. Power was out. A complete disaster. In Sweden? It couldn't happen. But let's just say it did. What would we, and by we, I mean the West, Western Europeans, Americans, British, the same. What would we do? We'd act immediately. We would send in whatever was required to fix it. And why would we do that? Because they are of our kind. When they're not, when they're in Asia or Africa, they're not our kind. So it's so easy to just separate that. But believe me, if we could somehow transform the exoskeleton of those people into looking like us, we would act. We would solve it. In fact, if Venusians landed on Earth who somehow didn't know anything about us, they would ask whoever it was they were talking to, presumably people of some power and influence, they would ask them, why is it that there are so many people with nothing, so many people tolerating wars which cause famine? We'd be kind of embarrassed. What could we say? Oh, well, they were fussy eaters? No. It's easy to switch off. And it's difficult to do anything as well. But I think doing something is the subject of another little talk. Yet the number one most read story of 2019 apparently was the death of footballer Emiliano Sala, who presumably drowned or was knocked unconscious or killed otherwise in a light plane accident in the Channel. Yet the story that apparently captured our attentions most was the death of Emiliano Sala, the footballer, who died en route to the UK in a light plane, went down in the Channel, and it was an accident. Of course, as always, somebody has to be blamed. We're very reluctant to just say, I don't have enough information to say something was more than an accident. And even if it was the pilot's error, and there are indications it was still what amounts to an accident. We really are not satisfied with being unable to judge. And I can understand why that is. It's not in our natures to withhold judgment, and for a good reason. Over the millennia, if a human being saw a tiger, he wouldn't stop to analyze the motives of the tiger, the background of the tiger, the tiger's side story. No, he'd just get out of the way. If he had not done that, he would have been eaten. So our rush to judgment has honourable background to it. And yet we should know not to actually take it seriously. Sure, respond, but settle on accident, because that happens most of the time. From slipping in the bathtub to starting your car backwards, they're going to happen. So move on. Don't pull them to pieces. Well, I've just about had enough of 2019, and I think you have too. But just a couple of things. Yeah, we've got the Metropolitan Police here complaining about the number of 999, that's 9/11 style, emergency calls for trivial reasons. Somebody complaining about getting the wrong fast food order, and somebody else complaining about biscuits. And they highlighted somebody who rang the police on emergency services simply to ask the time. Yes, okay, it's probably not entirely good allocation of resources, but I suppose would it be getting too philosophical to say, maybe he had a point, that guy who thought it was an emergency to know the time. Because you're looking at the clock now and waiting for 2020 to come into existence. And it should be a good year. We can make it that way. It's got a fancy name, 2020 vision. And we should have some. But that leads to the point here about resolutions for the new year. Have you got some? Okay, look, just one final digression back into I am old. Back into 2019, I have to mention the Brat of the Year, Greta Thunberg. Yes, that squirt that got up in the UN and bellowed at us all for, "You stole my childhood," she said. She was very upset. She looks a bit like one of those Cabbage Patch Kids, and she's in our faces all the time. Now, some people say, well, yeah, sure, but because we're being lazy about climate change, is it? Yes. We deserve to have some teenager squalling at us. But Time magazine made her Person of the Year, and like it or not, yeah, it's quite a good choice to have a frumpy kid, sour-faced, telling us that we've all been terrible and we're doing awful things to her. It seems to be kind of like a good snapshot for the year. After all, so many people have come back and said, my life is ruined because you did something to me when I was young. Wow. I suppose I can think back to being a kid, even before being a teenager, and think, well, yes, I guess there were quite a few weird experiences, but did they damage me? What do you see? Damaged goods? Yeah. But I don't think it was really from the old pervert who grabbed me on the knee in a cinema. I'd gone to the movies with some friends. We'd got into an argument, and I ended up sitting by myself. So, before you know it, there's this old dude sitting next to me. Now, the thing is, kids' instincts are pretty finely tuned. And even at, what was I, 9, 10 years old, I kind of knew this was a weirdo. We'd come across them before. We had some quite famous ones in our street. Anyway, he looked nervous and he smelt like a weirdo, a kind of combination of his probably deceased mother's cologne and musty clothing. I don't want to really go too far into that, but here's where he fouled up as a not particularly good pervert. Before he got to the knee grabbing, he offered me some sweets, some lollies. Yes. Now these chocolates, I knew. I mean, they might as well have been wrapped in Pervert's Choice brand chocolates. They were expensive Belgian imports. And, I took one, ate it. Why not? Hell, my friends weren't far away. Nothing was going to happen to me in a public place. No. I think I would have been pretty intolerable if kidnapped. Certainly wouldn't have lasted. So I took one of his grubby sweets, munched them up, and moved on. But what hit me even then was, here is somebody who's gone to a lot of trouble to choose his sweets. I can imagine him in the chocolate shop saying, oh, kids like that one. That's got a bright wrapper. You know, he would have spent some time going through the possibilities of which is the most distracting sweet that will allow me my fleeting seconds of pleasure by grabbing on hold of some kid's knee. Yeah, no, well, it was a nothing. And I only remember it because of the kind of weirdness of the guy. But did it damage me? Hell no. Gee. Things we used to do to our local perverts. Stone them to death. It was quite biblical. Yeah, so having people complain about things that happened to them in their teenage years and even earlier when the memory is pretty fogged is a lot of the time dissatisfaction with the state they're in now. And the past, tough or not, bad or not, in most cases is just an education. In some cases, it's actually a destruction. And that's a pity, and it can't be undone. And I don't think publicizing it will do anything more than just entertain. But enough of that. Hi, Greta. Find a new course. I tell you what, I bet Miss Thunberg will end up as an actress. I can see her now in a kind of some kind of Avengers series in 10 years' time. That's one of my daring dozen predictions for 2020 and beyond. Now, let's come to you. Why else would you have stayed this far into this thing? I'm just looking at your resolutions for 2020. You know, the kind that supposedly made at New Year's when you're either drunk or intoxicated or wiped out or frizzing off coke, whatever. It doesn't matter if you were stone cold sober. They would probably amount to the same thing. The only difference while being whacked off your face is the passion with which you deliver these resolutions. And I see I've noted, number one, give up your vices. Now, I don't know why you really want to do that to yourself. After all, those vices are about the only things that you really like. Of course, they don't work and are pretty destructive, and the real cruelty is they only last 20 minutes. Yeah, that's true. Almost everything we drink or take or snort or inject or subject ourselves to, the good feeling is so fleeting. You're lucky if it's minutes. It's that transition period from bored and discontent to a sudden rush of hope, and then it goes away. Hopefully, with the development of recreational drugs that aren't actually drugs as such, but are implants, part of the neural medical network where your medications are a part of a program that remotely gets tapped in. Hopefully, those will include the all-important reset button, so you can get that transition again. I can see some people taping down their reset buttons in such a scenario, a bit the way I had to tape up my morphine drip when I was injured. You know the ones where you press the button and you feel unbearable pain? I had a lot of that. You have to put a bit of chewing gum under the tape to make it... Anyway, I don't think they do it that way anymore. Good old days. Next resolution. Oh, yes. Start that business. Yes, you know the one that you've been dreaming of for years, the one that was ahead of its time. After all, you were the one who predicted YouTube. I'm sure you thought your old movies would could be loaded up and it would come to something. You didn't do anything about it. But anyway, this year's idea, I mean 2020's idea, you're going to do something about it. That's your resolution. Okay, you haven't got the money, but you convince that woman, you know, the rich one with all the dough. No, she won't be convinced. What about your old friend? No, he's married with kids and grandchildren now. He hasn't got a bean to spare. Well, anyway, start that business somehow. Number 3. That's cruel. Dump your partner and get a new one. Wow. There's, I mean, I noticed you wrote it down as repair relationship, settle the outstanding issues with your loved one. But somehow the ink's run away and it just says, dump partner, get a new one. Well, it's a thought. Exercise. Yeah, you just get a heart attack. Don't do it. If you're living any kind of a life, even running to the shop to restock, that's exercise enough. Look at all those skinny people. They live forever. Do you want to? Oh, yes. And finally, number 5, no filter, I've written. Why? Because it covers everything about bearing your natural self, being honest with people, telling people just what you think, how it is. You're really going to do that? Is it wise? Remember the almost nothing is worth saying rule. I'm not sure that you should bare your soul just at the moment. But how are those going to go? I mean, the resolutions. But here is the grim reality of your resolutions. They just won't happen. Oh yes, you won't give up your vices, you'll just feel worse about them. My suggestion is improve your standards for those vices, whatever they happen to be, and if they don't meet your standards, reject them. And just crank up the standards, you'll find you're doing better. Start that business. It's not going to happen. If you were business-minded, you would have been doing it, I don't know, you would have been selling newspaper on the street corner from a kid. You would have jumped out of high school and had a corner shop. You would have trampled about 5 competitors underfoot, but not as deeply as you trampled your business partners. You would have been pretty much that so-called good psychopath, if that's what it is, that succeeds in business. But that's not really going to happen. Anyway, you might as well relax because you eat, you sleep, you're warm, unless you're shivering in the cold with a smartphone. So forget about business. Concentrate on entertainment. Entertaining yourself. Enjoy your own company. I have a suggestion for a resolution for 2020. Don't actually have one as such. Just resolve to listen, to watch, to observe, to take things in. I'm sitting here in my living room, and if I choose to, I can look out of my window and see what? There's nobody out there. I live in a quiet street. There's a little park just outside the front. Is that telling me nothing? Am I wasting my time? Not necessarily. The observation of no one there tells me that people are doing things. They're busy elsewhere. What are they doing? They're preparing for a New Year's Eve bash, or trying to scrabble through some long-neglected work things. By the way, I'm supposed to be doing that today as well. But I'm not worried about it because nothing's going to happen with it. Half the people I do business with are on holidays, and they won't really notice the patch-up job I did on everything till they get back. And by then, something new would have come up. So don't rush out and become one of those, oh, somebody's passed by. She's got a little dog, that's good. And she's dressed up warm, she thinks ahead. And she seems to be about the most sensible person I've come across today. Don't get too ambitious. That's for a start. 2020 will be a good year. The sad thing is you won't know about it straight away. It's the beginning of a new decade, but it won't be until you look back upon it, perhaps as much as 10 years later, that you'll realize, yeah, that was a start of some great change. I could see that happening. In the modern world, it sounds very modern, 2020. We're not buzzing around in our own personal jet helicopters. I think our iPhones are kind of the only certain things that, all right, Samsung 10s or whatever it is, yeah, they're modern enough too, but those phones are the only things that really tell us we're in the modern age. And especially if you think what's in the background there. Now, as we speak, the big tech companies are all quietly trying to get one thing. A better battery? Yeah, well, yes, of course, that's needed. Aluminium's looking a good candidate, but I won't get distracted on technicalities. Not this morning. No, what the big tech companies are searching for, and where the decade of 2020 will be looked back upon, is the very first beginnings of a kind of artificial intelligence where the program appears to have consciousness. By that I mean it seems to be self-aware, and you can talk to it, not just like Siri or Alexa, which takes your words and bounces back the most likely set of words that seem to fit. It has no consciousness. And after all, what is consciousness? It's just kind of two little brains, two pocket calculators, being able to talk to each other. Oh, you did that, yeah, that kind of thing. It's no more than that. And the beginnings of it in the tech sense will be very important. Yes, I'm droning on, but I'll just finish on this with that point. Once it comes in, once the first machine is capable of understanding us and being able to hold on to all the information about solid things and matter and the edges and borders and how things work and how we react, it will effectively and happily take over from everything we do. So then our only function in the modern society, once we stop being nasty to our neighbours, is to entertain ourselves. Ask yourself this: how would I amuse myself if I had to live another 500 years and in good health, what would that list be? You can do anything, remember, especially stepping into the AI world, the simulations. I mean, rock-solid simulations. You stub your toe and you can feel it. What would you do? What would be your place to go? And I mentioned this kind of far-away techie dream because it goes back to my suggested resolution for 2020. Observe. Even when there's something that seems to hold no information, it in fact will. Don't resolve to do things on a list. Take in all those things you've missed before. And there's an awful lot. And I'll have a few surprises for you as the year goes on too. So, how has 2019 gone as far as true crime incidents is concerned? Well, kind of dismally. A lot of people getting caught doing things, but a surprising amount of people not being caught. And they're making their money by the usual things. The drug business is big as ever, but and that's going to hang around for quite a while. Cryptocurrencies are, in a way, dead in the form that we see them until they get adopted in some, unfortunately, sadly, regulated way. No, I think the coming crimes of 2020 will be scams of one kind or another. And scams because people are so easy to fool. Well, not really easy to fool exactly. They allow themselves to be fooled. They'll drift into things. In the same way that you'll wander away from your resolutions, drift back to work, drift over to the television, drift over to the microwave, drift over to the sofa. There will be a bunch of people who will fall for the new scams. I'll just see what Nico wants here. Nico's all right. He just, well, yes, barking at the postman, who coincidentally was delivering something about his prescriptions. He's not very well at the moment. He's on the tramadol. Poor thing's got back trouble. Haven't you, little one? Okay, anyway. Yes, in fact, forget about the dates. Imagine yourself for 2020 as timeless and walking like Alice in Wonderland through a world as you perhaps never have seen it before. You'll learn new things, and you can watch everywhere as people make mistakes and wonder when you're going to do exactly the same thing. I sometimes wonder at the probable irony of the job that I do during the day, putting in cameras. I've put in hundreds, perhaps over 1,000 now. Does anybody really watch what is going on with those cameras? Are people content that they can be away from home and tune in on their little worlds? I've got quite a few here. I check to see they're working, but I'm not really interested. Coming from my point of view and my little channel's point of view, perhaps 2020 you could devise some crime that's got the great feature of not actually harming anyone, perhaps enlightening somebody, yet bringing profits to you, annoying the authorities, and also, most important, is some kind of fun. And if you insist on doing something good, may I suggest that you take a little time to take out somebody young and show them something that's not electronic, something that they can observe from things around them. It might be people, it might be nature, but I think they'll be bored with nature, so tell them what you can see in people that they have yet to know. And that's about as much do-gooding as I can actually summon. And meanwhile, there's a lot of folly happening that I'll report to you around the world. And the next thing to look for is this identity thing. And this somehow ties into the resolutions too, because it's your own identity you want to change for 2020. Why do we all want to walk out of our lives into a new one? And what would that life be? And I'll mention that, because that's one of the prime things. If you have a new identity in mind, remember that it must be with a new personality. Otherwise, it will leave the same traces as your old life. And in today's world, they're so easy to find. From the same pattern of keystrokes that you make, like an accomplished piano player would make, those will soon be identifiable. Somebody who has disappeared could be identified simply by the way they tap on their phone screens. Given 24 hours of those tappings, I'm sure it would be probably as identifiable as a fingerprint. Is there any way out of all this? Well, in 2020, stay tuned and tune in. Bye.